Everybody. Good afternoon. Lovely to see you all as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. As always, a great turnout. So thank you. So you will have this is obviously our last meeting of the Digital Inclusion Alliance for Wales Network this calendar year, and we're finishing on a high note, as I'm sure you will agree. Focusing on an area which we touch on a lot, and which has kind of come to our attention in many ways, probably most recently through the work on the minimum digital living standard, which demonstrated the importance of people being able to afford data poverty. And so we're really focusing on that this afternoon, both hearing in a moment from Sarah Knowles, but also in breakout groups. We're going to have some breakout groups to discuss it in our small groups, as we always do in these meetings, and then we'll come back together towards the end of the meeting. And then the final part of the agenda is Caddy's going to talk to us about a survey that the Alliance are doing. Perhaps without further ado, I'll introduce Sarah. So Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. Sarah is from the Data Poverty Lab, and no doubt you'll tell us a little bit about that, as well as other stuff too. And so I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. It's lovely to see everyone, and really great to get the opportunity to share some of our findings with you. I am going to attempt to share screen.
So we have your slides, but not yet in presentation view.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. There we go. Hopefully now presentation view. Wonderful. Good to go. Hi, thank you everyone, and thank you for bearing with me. So yes, I'm Sarah Knowles. I am the current iteration of the Data Poverty Lab, which was established in 2021 between Good Things Foundation and their partner Nominet, and has gone through different phases of work, which I'll cover some of our kind of greatest hits today. And I do like to say it's kind of, there've been different people. It's a bit like Doctor Who, and I'm the kind of current face of the Data Poverty Lab. But you know, hopefully this regeneration will do this well enough. So going to talk to you about data poverty. Obviously thought it'd be useful to start off with the definitions, explain the kind of scope of what we're looking at. So this is actually one of the original definitions from the all-party parliamentary group into digital exclusion and data poverty. And it's when someone is unable to afford to get online or unable to afford to be online long enough to meet their needs. So it's affordability, it's cost as the barrier, and it's that connection, getting online as the thing that we're interested in. And it's worth saying, though, that kind of definition evolves as we kind of grasp more about the topic. This is a definition from Nesta that I think we've adopted within the lab. This is individuals, households, or communities who cannot afford sufficient private and secure mobile or broadband data to meet their essential needs. And I think you can see there how we're starting to kind of fill this out a bit, that yes, it is about cost and about connection, but it's about having then enough data to meet your needs. It's about what that looks like. Is it secure for you? Is it sufficient? So we're starting to really build out what it means to be in data poverty, what the limitations of that are in your experience. This is something called the pointless triangle, which you may have come across before. This is by Kat Dixon, previously one of the fellows in the Data Poverty Lab. And I include this because whenever I start talking to people about data poverty, so in the interviews we did, for example, people always say, well, you know it's not just that, don't you? It's a holistic challenge, a holistic problem that kind of requires holistic solutions. And so I wanted to include this to say we do absolutely recognize that. As I say, this is a bit of work out of the lab itself. It says that you need, yes, data is important, but to use data, you need a device. To get the most out of that, you need skills. So each of those things needs to work together. And also that, poverty is very much one of the barriers, cost is a barrier, but motivation, confidence, also things that matter. So we do kind of recognize those different elements. Having said that, I think it is really important that we have this kind of spotlight on data poverty, and I've put some of the reasons why here. So first of all, data poverty, it disproportionately affects really some of the most vulnerable groups in society. So when we hear feedback, for example, from people who run the National Data Bank, which I'll cover more in a moment. They are talking about people who are homeless, people who are refugees, people in situations of domestic violence. These are really vulnerable people who, you know, I'm sure you'd agree, we really want to make sure that we are meeting their needs, we're doing things to help them. The other aspect is that data poverty it compounds and it multiplies exclusion. And I've put some quotes at the side there that are from a report from another one of the fellows, Sarah Knowles. And I think you can see just the kind of level there of how important connection is. So people saying, I would never have been able to keep my employment, my mental health would have suffered, I would have struggled to stay sober, I wouldn't have had essential information from hospital. You can see, I think, how important this is, how potentially other inequalities around health, around disability, can get worse, really, if you're in a situation of data poverty. And that's that kind of final point that I really think data poverty is like quicksand. So if you're in data poverty, it makes it harder to get out of poverty overall. You can't access debt advice. For example, you can't find, so the example there, you're excluded from the potential of buying cheaper food, clothes and furniture. It makes it worse. It keeps you stuck in that situation. So that's why I think it is really helpful and kind of important to have this focus on data poverty as part of that holistic problem. Now, I mentioned kind of covering the lab so far. This is some of the work that's been done. First off, on the side there, you've got what makes a good solution to data poverty. This was a co-produced piece of work by Tom McGrath with the Apple Collective, who are people who've got lived experience of poverty. And the core of this, I think, was to say, what would a solution look like if it was actually meeting real people's needs? And I think that core of lived experience is obviously kind of so important. I come from, a lot of the work I've done previously is in digital health technology, and you have a lot of solutions in search of a problem in that kind of space. And I think to say, actually, if this is a solution, what need is it meeting? What does it look like? How is it helping? So important. A couple of the other reports that have come out, so by Kat Dixon, who I already mentioned, her report looked at scaling solutions, basically saying there are solutions that exist around to data poverty. There are good examples of things that are being done. The issue is kind of how are they linked up? How are they getting to the people they need to? And also, as I mentioned, Sade Nathaniel Ayadele, her work, which was about is internet access an essential utility or a human right, argues, I think, really convincingly for just how urgent this problem is, because it is essential. It is really fundamental to so many aspects of life, to so many aspects of receiving essential services. And so our phase of the lab now, I think it's kind of pulling these different threads together. So it's the idea of, okay, we've got some solutions. We think these solutions exist in the world and we need to understand more about them. We know it's an urgent problem, so we really want to think about how we make those solutions better so we can meet people's needs. But throughout it all, thinking about in terms of lived experience, thinking what actually matters to people on the ground. What does this look like to people who are receiving them? And that's the kind of key evaluation that we want to bring to it. And I forgot to say, I am happy to take questions throughout, by the way. I can't see chat from here, but if anyone does want to raise hand or anything like that, please do let me know. Quick recap on the findings so far before I go into kind of the meat of the work about the solutions. So I mentioned the CHESS framework, and this is what that stands for. So the C is for cheap. So is this actually kind of, does it address cost in some way? Does it address affordability? Is that fundamental challenge? H is for handy. Now this is essentially kind of how easy is it for someone to get to a solution, for them to know that solution exists, for them to then access it, or is it actually kind of behind various barriers or hard work for them to actually get into? E stands for enough, which just I think increasingly becomes important. How much is enough data? The more things move online, the more services move online, enough kind of keeps rising. It keeps being an issue of actually what's sufficient to meet people's needs, to enable them to kind of fully make use of digital. Is it safe? Again, kind of keeps raising itself as an issue. Do people have privacy? Do they feel like they've got security of the data that they're using? And the last one is suitable, and that is about, does it flex, I guess, does a solution flex to the different circumstances someone can find themselves in? So does it work for them in their particular situation? Are they stuck with solutions that don't quite meet their needs? The reason I wanted to recap chess right now is because one of, I guess, the main things that has come out of the first phase of the work, as we were using chess to kind of, as a framework to kind of interrogate the solution. So if you take a solution and compare it to these criteria of cheap, handy, enough, safe, and suitable, I think one thing that really started to emerge was that you can kind of see two different profiles of user needs with chess. And I think this is a strength of chess, by the way, that it helps us articulate that there is not a silver bullet, there's not a single solution that's going to meet everybody's needs. And these are kind of qualitative profiles, I guess, if you know the kind of idea of using kind of personas that help you think about decision making, think about different users. And the ones we've got here, so I think there's very much a profile of people who are really in urgent need, and they're the people that I mentioned, kind of who might be in situations of domestic violence, they might be homeless. Then on the other side, you've got people, I think, who are more looking for affordability support. They are people in perhaps more stable situations, but really looking for help to manage, for example, their household budget and get the most out of digital. And what's important, I think, is that you can see where actually sometimes these things are kind of contradictory. It's not going to work in both cases. So it starts off with, I think people in urgent need, they need something free, whereas with affordability, probably something discounted. I think the issue of enough is really important. So for someone in urgent need, it's that really core access to essential services, you know, access to be able to contact their friends and family. That gets more complicated in the affordability profile. Mention the minimum digital living standard, which I think shows that basket of digital goods, as they say, looks different for different people. And actually people in that affordability element, they want an element of choice. It's not necessarily the basics package that they want. They want to be able to pick the things that are right for themselves and their family. The issue of safety, I think, is interesting. So for people in urgent need, so for example, the people perhaps in situations with experiencing domestic violence, they need privacy in terms of it needs to be very much private to them, an individual device that no one else has access to. Whereas for people in the affordability profile, it might be more about spatial privacy. So having privacy in their home area, but shared amongst the family so that different family members can do different things. And lastly, in terms of suitable, so for the affordability profile, it can be about that stability of like a fixed broadband connection, and also stability in terms of having a regular contract, knowing what the cost is going to be each month so they can plan that into the budget. Whereas people in the urgent need profile, in some cases, they don't have stable accommodation at all, so that isn't going to work for them. They need a portable solution. So I raise that, as I say, because I think chess is really useful at illustrating why there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. I don't know if you've heard the phrase, sometimes it's rather than silver bullet, you need silver buckshot. You need multiple things that are going to work together all at the same target. And I think that that's the space we're in with data poverty, and this hopefully kind of helps communicate that. So now I'm going to move on, I guess, to kind of the meat of the presentation, which is about the solutions themselves. The remit that we had when we started the work, inspired by that, the previous reports, was, okay, so we know solutions exist. Can we evaluate how well they're doing currently and look at where they could be improved? And the improvements that we were interested in, and that very much came out of the interviews and the literature review that we did, firstly, were about the core user experience. So using the chess, as I've just described, kind of what is it like for that person? What do they get? What are the barriers? Is it appropriate for them? Are there any kind of risks or challenges? But the two things that really came up a lot, one is the idea of scale. Who gets this solution? Can the solution be made bigger? Should it be reaching more people? Who is it accessible to? And also sustainability, which was a lot around kind of how are these solutions funded? Do they have kind of long-term funding to them? And can they be adopted? Can they continue? What's the kind of the foundation of this that's going to keep them going? So I've said the word solutions a lot, and it probably, if I define what I mean by what is a solution to data poverty, and I've got an example here, which hopefully you will have heard of. We are from Good Things Foundation, so hopefully this isn't something new, and it is kind of nationally advertised, particularly this time of year. So you've got the National Data Bank, for example, which offers free SIMs. with mobile data to people in need. It's a solution because it's directed at people where cost is the barrier. In this case, it's giving free SIMs, and it's about giving them that connection. One thing I want to point out is that you could look at this and say, well, actually, so the solution is to donate free SIMs. That's the core of the solution, and this is just an example of it. And I think what we found and what we'd argue is that the delivery of this stuff kind of in the real world is really key to what it is and how well it works, and to what would need to be done to improve it. So how it could be scaled and how it could be sustained. So as I go through the solutions, we've got 6 in total. You'll see that kind of it's a mix of, there's a core idea usually that is something like give people a free connection, give people a discount. But then we are also looking at almost the case study example of it, how it's been delivered in the world, and what that tells us about what needs to be improved for that solution to do better. So I'll go through the 6 now. You'll notice at the top, I've got those little kind of almost post-it notes. These are as we're talking to people. And so today, again, it'll be a case of when we get kind of consistent questions where people are kind of, it would just be really helpful if you could just pinpoint, for example, is there any cost to the user on each of these? Where's the funding come from? We're trying to do that. And if you've got feedback later on where you're kind of like, this would also be useful, that's really helpful for us. But the National Data Bank, so as I say, hopefully pretty familiar to you. The idea is that it's like a food bank, but for mobile data. It provides free mobile SIM cards. So it's individual SIMs for individual devices, but it is a national network. As we said, it's expanded now to over 2,000 data banks supported by the Good Things Foundation. And it's a mix of charity and commercial funding. Good Things themselves are a charity. The SIMs are donated by 3 different commercial partners. Now, for each of these slides, you'll see I hone in on some of the criticisms we found, or some of the challenges or the caveats, and then go on to what the improvements of that we think would be. So with this, first of all, the SIMs themselves, as I said, they're from 3 different providers. They're not actually consistent in exactly how they work. One of them is preloaded, others require kind of a sign-on, a monthly registration, and the total amounts of data they have aren't consistent. And the individual themselves using the data bank doesn't get to choose this because the data bank needs to give out equal numbers of those SIMs, so it's not by choice. They need devices, obviously, the pointless triangle. A SIM needs a device, and it also needs to be an unlocked device for this to work. We got feedback that there is a sense that the data banks maybe need more active promotion, and that's because of the idea that people know they're in areas where they think there's a lot of need here, but they're maybe not getting a lot of uptake. And so the suggestion is actually maybe people don't realize the data bank's there for them and what the offer is and how they can access it. There's an issue raised about this kind of lack of data on use, which means the people who get the SIMs aren't followed afterwards. That can kind of limit the evaluation that's done, which can limit kind of making cases for impact. And also always worth making this point, as I said, a lot of this is about delivery in the real world. This kind of isn't just a kind of throwing a SIM out to someone. There is this kind of support network around it, and data bank staff get support from Good Things, and the staff themselves then often take the time to kind of support people to understand what the offer is. So in terms of the solutions, these are ones that have been suggested. To make those donated SIMs actually more consistent and perhaps longer term, so the terms are kind of 12 months at the moment, or to enable the user choice of SIMs so they can choose what's most appropriate for them. A suggestion to co-locate data banks with key services or support signposting. This relates to that handy thing, how easy it is to get to these. Is the data bank, are you made aware of data bank at the point that actually you could become aware that this is a problem? Would that help with uptake? A suggestion that there is this need to ensure matched provision with the National Device Bank, which is also provided to make sure that people have unlocked devices, and also finally a suggestion to improve impact monitoring. Now, Jangala Wi-Fi in a box is the next one. When I started off saying how we define a solution, and I said it's partly what the kind of fundamental function is, but it's also about the case around it. The reason I've got Jangala next in the list is because these actually use data bank SIMs. They use the same SIMs. So there could be an argument of, well, is that not kind of the same model? And the way we differentiated them, why we differentiated them, is because actually what that beneficiary receives is quite different. So it's not just the individual SIM here, it's a different package. And we decided kind of that's really the key in terms of differentiating. So what that user receives is quite different. With Jungala, so Jungala actually originated creating what are called big boxes, which can provide essentially emergency large-scale Wi-Fi networks in kind of very challenging areas. During COVID, I think they realized that there was also need for this kind of provision here in the UK, and came up with the Get boxes, essentially a kind of a smaller, cheaper version of that could be posted out to people. Using the databank SIM, the Get box can create a closed Wi-Fi network for up to 15 to 20 users, okay? That uses something called traffic shaping, which is where people get an initial burst of speed, and then it's sort of closed down so that that speed is fairly shared between different users. Issues raised about the MiFi have been actually that the setup can be challenging. So I've said kind of that it will, it's posted to you. There are then some issues with perhaps not everyone can quite work out how to get it set up. Also perhaps issues with the instructions, for example, are currently in English. So that limits kind of the number of people who can sort of pick up and play with this. The total data provided is limited because these are national data bank SIMs, which also currently have those limits to them. There's a question about future use of 5G, which would bring benefits such as kind of better security and better reach, but actually would exceed that current data cap extremely quickly. Also, one issue that we've heard raised is that the Get boxes are currently provided by Jungala on something called indefinite loan. That can sometimes be a bit of an issue with some of the services who receive them. Essentially, different services or organizations get in touch with Jungala and ask for those Get boxes, and that can sometimes be slightly confusing for people. So the suggested improvements here are firstly, to make that setup process easier, particularly ensuring that the content is accessible to different people, for example, different languages, but also perhaps thinking about if visual or video kind of information is easier. To support additional rolling SIM provision or provide unlimited SIMs, to provide outright funding for Get boxes to be kept or locally reused to kind of get around that confusion. And also to actually, kind of a broad one here, but as this works on mobile, invest in extending mobile network provision or exploring alternatives such as satellite provision to kind of increase the number of places that Get boxes could be sent to provide an alternative to fixed broadband. Speaking of fixed broadband, this is the third solution in the box. Broadband social tariffs, again, tend to be very well known. To recap, the reason we've clustered these as a set of solutions rather than individual is because we kind of looked at it and what the beneficiary gets is the same across them. So it is a discounted broadband package. And also when you look across them, actually the issues are actually pretty consistent. I think we would have been kind of data driven on this. If there was one social tariff that really stood out, we would have considered that separately, but really kind of pretty consistent in the issues. So it is a discounted specific product. The product themselves vary across different providers in the price and the speed. Issues raised are a lack of awareness. People aren't aware that this is an option for them, and really concerned that perhaps providers who, these are provider funded, aren't actively promoting these to people because they are cheaper. There's concern that even when people are aware of them, there's very low uptake, and a suggestion that it might be because they tend to be these basic packages, they're not sufficient for the different needs people have. Just the fact that there are so many of them and that people aren't sure what information they need to find to understand them, they're quite confusing. And also a worry that that price point, so I think the minimum on there we can see is sort of about £15, that is actually still too high for the household who are most in need. That's not affordable for them. So the suggestions to improve broadband social tariffs, one is to reduce or remove VAT, which happens on some essentials items, which would bring down the overall cost. To support a kind of automatic identification or enrolment from different services, rather than putting that kind of burden of understanding you're eligible and trying to find a tariff onto the individual themselves. To offer as a voucher or a discount on a product that the person can then choose. So rather than having to pick a set kind of package, a person can instead pick the package that's right for them, but they get discount on it. To set and regulate a consistent social tariff across all providers, again, to kind of reduce the confusion and make this a more standard offer. To explore the balance of commercial and public funding in this. I think the message from providers is that they really can't make the price of this any lower themselves. To revise eligibility criteria. So at the moment, it's anyone on a number of different benefits. And the suggestion is actually, should this better target people in deeper poverty with a kind of a better discount? Would that be a more effective way? Lastly, support for more direct initiatives, such as those by altnets. So some altnets, for example, that we've spoken to have said that they find that their social tariffs that have very low uptake. So they're trying kind of different approaches. For example, Community Fibre tried to partner with the DWP so they could offer 6 months free broadband to people who are using job centres in their area. Should we be looking at those kind of initiatives instead? Okay. This is number 4. This is again a provider funded one. This is called zero rating. Zero rating means that essentially a customer accessing that website, if the network has zero rated it, won't pay anything. It doesn't take anything out of their data allowance. So it's really mainly for mobile, because you don't tend to get those kind of data usage mechanisms on broadband. Different providers zero rate different websites. So again, it's not consistent, but the typical sites included are those that provide health and welfare information. So I've got some examples on the page there, and also that provide debt support. The issues with zero rating are, firstly, there's low awareness, and particularly people don't like the name and say, you know, the name, I think someone's kind of, is this a green sustainability thing rather than perhaps being about digital? This issue that it isn't consistent, it's not mandated. This is just something that some providers chose to offer from COVID and continued with. There's a kind of technical issue that only full domains can be zero rated. The reason this is a concern is if you imagine, for example, you might want to zero rate BBC Bite Size because that's educational information. But the issue is you'd have to zero rate all of the BBC websites. That would include something like iPlayer. That can potentially worry that provider, because then are they kind of contravening net neutrality? Will they have other streaming providers say, well, why is iPlayer being provided for free? There's also an issue that it gets to the point where the commercial impact of that becomes a concern. So for example, government websites, they would have to zero rate every kind of .gov website. And I think there is a concern that, well, that becomes actually quite a big cost that's being observed by the provider. There's a concern that kind of third-party content embedded in a website, if you click on a YouTube video, for example, that takes you out, you might then still get charged for that. And also there is time needed to do this. I think there can be an impression that it's kind of just a button that you click somewhere that, you know, magically zero rates. And that's not the case. There is kind of time needed to develop and implement these. So some suggestions to improve. To change the name, make it something that people understand so people are more aware. To confirm a standard set of zero rated sites so actually people know what to expect, make this more consistent. To invest in maybe kind of technical exploration for workarounds for that domain issue so that we can be, I guess, more nuanced in which sites we zero rate. And then finally, to explore funding so that, for example, .gov websites are all zero rated, make it meaning that that kind of essential information provided by government sites is zero rated to access, and think about how that should be funded, who should be providing the cost for that. Okay, we've got the last two now. This is an example called Rochdale Mesh. Now, a mesh network is essentially using particular kinds of equipment and installing a network so that you can amplify a Wi-Fi in a larger area, but keep the speeds that you would get if you, so it's kind of a consistent maintained offer. This was an attempt in Rochdale. So Rochdale Local Council basically decided to use some grant money to try to implement this. They did that through working with some different partners who installed and kind of funded the equipment for them, and they paid for the internet connection. What this does, they specifically targeted neighbourhoods that they felt where data poverty and inequalities were likely to be an issue, and they described this as providing kind of free civic Wi-Fi. Issues with the mesh network. So one is that it is time-limited grant funding, so it's The internet connection, which is currently provided by the local authority, is just on a contract at the moment. There are some limits on what users can access in terms of the user experience. So, for example, users of this Wi-Fi can't access gambling sites or pornography sites. So there is an argument that they're not being given kind of the same freedom as users as people paying for internet access. Obviously needs cooperation to actually access sites and to place equipment. People can need home Wi-Fi extenders. They were provided for free originally in the Rochdale pilot, but it's kind of, is that a cost that needs to be factored in? Scaling this kind of model to rural networks, rural areas would require additional work to work out how you can get this equipment to function properly in those places. And it's unclear if this kind of civic Wi-Fi model was continued, do we need to monitor or guarantee kind of speed and data levels so that's consistent across places? Suggestions for the improvements are to remove the data use restrictions, so it's fully free use, to incentivize or require local organizations to host these networks, to expand them, to support longer term contracts, which could be with public or commercial providers to actually pay for the internet itself, to provide these guidance and standards on expected speeds and provision, and potentially to provide free Wi-Fi extenders. This is the last solution, and then we'll move on to the more interactive part where I'm keen to get your views. So this is a model called open roaming. This is through an organization called the Wireless Broadband Alliance. Essentially, they provide the support for different providers to sign into their network and become identity providers. And it creates a kind of a federated public Wi-Fi system where the person who is connected only has to have one sign in. So it's hopefully safer because they're not signing into different kind of free Wi-Fi. And it means they can have then seamless provision in as many kind of organizations as a part of the network. Issues raised, that seamless provision is dependent on the number of providers, obviously. So people have to sign up to be providers of this, and there is a cost to that. They have to pay a fee to the Wireless Broadband Alliance. There's low perceptions of safety. I think when we talk about this, people think about open Wi-Fi. People are concerned about data security on that. And obviously, because it's in public spaces, there's limited spatial privacy. Also, the guaranteed baseline speed, providers can provide a higher speed, but the guaranteed speed is only 256, which is arguably not enough to meet many essential needs. So suggestions are to support organizations to become network providers and identity providers, perhaps particularly focus on incentivizing organizations in areas or that are known to kind of serve people experiencing data poverty, to raise awareness of safety and privacy in terms of connecting through this model, and perhaps to encourage a higher baseline speed. So that was a rocket tour, kind of a whistle-stop tour, I think is the phrase. They are all the kind of different improvements that have been suggested. Now that we've identified what improvements have been made, this phase of the work is about saying, okay, well, which of these different improvements should we prioritize? If we had kind of the magic money box and could invest in these, where would we put our effort? Where do we think things need to do? And most importantly, why do we want to prioritize them? I'm going to break this now into two different sections. So firstly, we've got a Mentimeter with all the improvements, which I'm going to give you some time to look over. And we're just going to see where people put their investment in that. And I think however you interpret that in terms of what would be a good place for investment, however you interpret that is correct. Okay, so if you're thinking it's about what's most feasible, if you're thinking it's about what the short-term impact is, or if you're thinking, oh, it's about long-term change, because the why is what we're then going to discuss in breakout groups. So we can actually kind of share some of our impressions, say what we need to know, I guess, to make these kind of decisions. Before I go onto the Menti, I think I can pause for questions quickly, or I'm not sure if questions have been asked. Yeah.
No, I think that would be brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. Yeah, I think it would be helpful just if there are any questions about what you've said, because that may affect what people want to respond to.
Absolutely, yes.
And just you may not have seen this because you probably couldn't see the chat, but just to say that we are joined. We've been joined by Samantha from Jangala.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
So who's the UK lead, I think. So if people have any questions about Jangala, I'm sure Samantha will do her best to answer them. But are there any questions? If people have got any questions they want to put to Sarah now, this would be a good time. Pop your hand up. If not, we will move on to the Mentimeter, but just give people a moment. Perhaps I could kind of make a statement, stroke pose a question, which is, to colleagues who may know whether this is still true, but it was the case that nhs.wales.uk had been 0 rated. So access to health board websites, for example, in Wales was 0 rated. Did anyone know if that's still the case? And I think possibly gov.wales too. Certainly during COVID they were. And I think they still are. Anyone know? Dowie, do you know?
Not sure if it still is. I know that it was during the pandemic, as you said. I'm not sure if that's been reversed. I will give me 2 seconds, I'll have a look.
Oh, excellent, good. That's fine. Yeah, because so you know that would be an example of government level 0 rating. But as you say, there is still the problem that you go maybe to a health board website and it then takes you off to a YouTube or somebody else's site, and you find yourself incurring cost without realizing it.
Yeah,
which is a risk. So Samantha, there was not, you said there was nothing specific you wanted to raise. Is there if people have questions that they do want to ask you subsequently, how's the best way to contact you?
Well, I can certainly share my my contact details with this group. I was invited onto the call by Sarah. I think more just for me to listen in for my information and learn a bit about what this group is, and then by pure coincidence, it turned out to be incredibly relevant. So I'm glad this is the one that I managed to join. And Sarah Knowles, it would be great to have a chat with you at some point, because I now work with Kat, who you referenced in your presentation, because it's a small world.
It is, yes. I think I've already been on to Rich to introduce me to you, so this is
Really?
got a more direct link. It's so wonderful, yes.
The power of the Digital Inclusion Alliance, and Samantha, it's always highly relevant, but particularly highly relevant to you. Okay, I think I can't see any hands, so I think what we'll do is we'll go to the Mentimeter, and there will be opportunities later if there are other questions, I'm sure.
So I'm going to pop the link into the chat, so hopefully you will be able to access it from there. You should get to a screen where you'll see kind of all of these different improvements listed. And as I said, what we'd like you to do is just go through them. You should be able to pick 3. You don't have to pick all ones from the same solution. As I said, your interpretation of this is kind of the correct interpretation. We're really interested in why people invest in different ways. What I will do, if anyone has got trouble accessing it, I'm going to assume people are scanning through things. I think if we give 5 minutes for people to do this, and then after that, have a quick analysis of the total votes, and then into the breakout rooms.
Okay, you're going to have to tell us now, Sarah. I think we're going to run out of time. So.
Yes, all right, okay, we're good. So the top 3 that we have that have come up, first is actually for the data bank to make donated SIMs consistent, and for the data bank to be co-located with key services. We then got a kind of equal run, so for broadband tariffs to reduce or remove VAT. And then the next one is for 0 rating to confirm a consistent set of sites. So they are the top ones for the facilitators. So that was 2 on the data bank about making SIMs consistent and co-location, reducing or removing VAT on the tariffs, and confirming a consistent set of sites for 0 rating. So if we can go into the breakout rooms, I think we'll need to condense the time on that. If we do,
yeah, that's okay. That's fine. Yeah, no, we'll be all right. We'll come back at 25:02.
Oh, okay.
And we'll have 5 minutes less on the feedback. That should be fine. So with that, Caddy's going to press the magic button and transport us to a different place. Where we will talk about those. Well, you've actually given us 4, haven't you?
It is that there's 4 at the top, I'm afraid. So yes.
Right. Excellent.
Brilliant. I will move everyone in. There'll be a range of, I think it's about 5 to 6 people. We're just having a couple of people drop off calls. So I'm just moving some people about quickly to ensure we've got enough. Amazing. Okay, I'm going to move everyone into breakout rooms now. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of lead-in time, so you weren't completely brought in mid-sentence. I upped it to 120 seconds of countdown for everyone to let those conversations.
Very generous, thank you. I'm aware we had originally planned to finish at 1:45, which we can still kind of aim for if we've got time to just do maybe a quick whip round and ask for feedback from the breakouts. That'd be okay.
Absolutely. How many groups were there, Caddy?
There were 7 groups.
Okay, so there'd be very quick feedback.
Very quick. So yeah, sorry. So yeah, can people from the facilitators the rate route group put their hands up, and then I can be able to pick you. I'll give a little bit of quick feedback from my group, which is really interesting. We started talking a lot about both, I think, with the mesh and with Jagala, I think talking about what's the kind of actual additional full cost of these things once you put in staff time, what's the sustainability in terms of who's responsible for looking after things so if equipment's donated and then it breaks down, who's responsible for it, so these kind of big issues. I also really liked, I think it was Donna made the point that she kind of went for removing VAT because that was the closest option to saying treat this like an essential utility, so it was kind of to make that point actually to go for that, which I thought was really interesting. Great. Hannah, do you want to give us a rapid summation?
Yeah, we had a really solid group who discussed things like data banks, so like the co-locating, making sure that initiatives like the data bank were just known and available, as well as making sure that we had like really robust impact data behind it. And we also talked about broadband social tariffs, the VAT reduction, altnets. We had a discussion about where they fit in, and likewise open roaming came up about kind of incentivizing organizations to join.
Fantastic, thank you. Connor?
I never figure it out quick enough with Zoom now. Yeah, similarly, similar bits that we touched on. Some of it around kind of streamlining and making the broadband tariffs easier to access, being able to access them via universal credit would be positive. Some consistent messaging from providers and across the UK around provision. Linking of data bank with core services, having one key place to go, and being able to, in areas that like are really local and only can benefit from one provider, for example, giving the option to users to choose that. Any improvement in any area will be positive, but there could be additions. And this is going to sound like DCW tagline. I promise it isn't. This is something someone else said. I'm not saying this. Digital support with these services would be beneficial, such as digital confidence, Denbighshire. Internal skills need to be supported too. Like all of this provision hinges on digital confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that holistic element. Yeah, thank you. Laura?
Thank you. To echo sort of Connor's last point and to lead me in quite nicely, something that we talked about was having that sort of having that opportunity to get people to understand sort of what services are available to people, what's important, and there was a real void in the options for sort of skills of how to sort of engage with, you know, whatever connectivity tool there is and why it's important. So it felt like there was a little bit of a gap there. The other thing that we mentioned as well was not having potentially a national solution to really local problems. You know, a couple of the things that we talked about is Rhondda Cynon Taf, for example. You can be in one corner of the county and EE works fine, and then you can go sort of 20 minutes up the road and have absolutely nothing. So you know, there needs to be sort of very, very localized opportunities for people. Lots of the sort of top 4 were mentioned, you know, with the votes of the improvements that we thought we could see. It was interesting with regards to making data sims consistent. It would be good to sort of understand that in a little bit more detail from does that mean it would just be O2 available for everyone, or does that mean that the amount of data is the same for everyone and speeds and all of that sort of stuff? So yeah, to feed on from Connor's and move on a little bit.
Yeah, really wonderful, thank you. Dowie?
I think probably echoing quite a few of the points have already been made, had a good discussion in the group. I think, yeah, you know, by the sounds of it, a lot of us had kind of prioritized the same areas, removing VAT on broadband, obviously one of the key ones, and I think there was a comment as well. So town-based mesh networks, you know, don't always work that well. There's lots of existing technologies. Can we just make them cheaper? Which is obviously what kind of we're trying to do in some of these areas. I think there was a point as well around the importance of safeguarding. So important from a young people's perspective, ensuring that young people are safe, needing to consider that. Ensuring, well, specifically with the data bank, but I guess with anything really, ensuring the process is simple and clearly understood and accessible. So, you know, that could cause some issues in terms of the kind of the different types of SIM cards offered through the data bank. Having that consistency and having the process as simple as possible would obviously help some of the groups we're trying to reach.
Wonderful, thank you. Russell?
Yeah, we talked about, well, several things really. We talked about the fact that with clients, they have such a range of needs, even within a particular organization, have such a range of needs that there's no one solution that necessarily fits all. We talked about the importance, the vital importance of zero rating, particularly for sites where there's no option to go. So like if you're talking about DWP or health service or government sites, the need for zero rating. We talked, for example, about DWP, and as there's so much of a migration over to universal credit, that is such a demanding from data point of view for clients to use that's such an important need, because it's becoming detrimental. And also you've got there the whole thing around, but it's not just that, it's about the skills, having the devices and having the skills to use it. So it's that whole sort of triangle as well. In fact, there was a need to have a greater understanding about tariffs and about VAT and reducing that. And it will also be, in terms of the data bank and the SIMs, there needs to be perhaps a map of providers to say where they are able to coverage, because I think one or two people said that they'd received SIMs which couldn't be used in their area, so they were wasted in that sense. So it might be a need to look at a little bit better at how they are distributed, and looking at perhaps a map of coverage so that SIMs that only cover a particular area are sent into that area.
Yeah, that's great. Brilliant, thank you. And then Joe, if you can do super rapid fire.
Certainly, all of the above. Consistency of data bank offer, both in terms of the amount and type of data that's available through each, but also the process. And that also linked into the Jangala experience. We had Samantha in our group talking about how they'd had to try and find workarounds to cope with the inconsistency of the data bank offer for the Wi-Fi in a box opportunity. And we also talked about social tariffs and how not just the price, but the offer needs to match what's a basic requirement. And actually, is that enough, and are they keeping track with evolutions in what's available, whilst other broadband packages are getting cheaper and more opportunities to like bigger and bigger packages. Actually, social tariffs have stayed constant, stayed about the same price, stayed the same sort of level, and that's they're going to be pretty much obsolete going forward. So a big change needed there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Huge thank you to everyone in the breakout rooms and to the facilitators. I'm going to put together a little summary of kind of feedback, and I'll share that back with the network. But that, I think we are done. Hopefully 1 minute over.
Thank you, Sarah.
Amazing.
Lovely, everybody. So thank you. That was brilliant. Well done. And as you say, nearly on time. So we're just going to go over to Caddy now, who's going to talk to us about a survey.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Sarah, and all facilitators. So I'm standing in for Sarah, that you all know, who coordinates the Alliance. Essentially, you'll be familiar with this, but we are continuing to do our Exploring Impact reports. Hopefully you've all been reading them. They are up on our website. But these surveys that we do at the end of network meetings are really valuable for us. You know, for example, we've used the data from them to shape the Alliance's response to the recent Welsh Government consultation on the future of digital inclusion policy. And this way we can really make sure that we are reflecting your opinions and views. So you also get a vote on what we focus on in the next meeting. So the next meeting is going to be in March. So I'm going to share a Microsoft Forms link in the chat. If you can all take a few minutes right now to fill it out, and then I will pass back to Hamish. So you should see a Forms link in the chat. And at the top, it will say priority 3, addressing data poverty as a key issue. If you can complete that, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to leave us all in silence, nothing like a little bit of social pressure to get everybody filling a form in. And then Hamish, I'll come back to you probably in about 5 minutes. How is everyone getting on? People just about finishing it up? I've got thumbs up. Is there a couple of thumbs up? Brilliant. Okay, Hamish, I will pass back to yourself. Thank you so much. If you haven't finished filling it in, don't worry, it's not going to randomly close on you. Just please do make sure that you submit your response. Thank you. Hamish, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Caddy, and thank you very much, Sarah, as well, for a really interesting and very informative presentation. In our group, I did a little straw poll to see if everybody knew all of the various options you described, and the answer was we didn't. So that was really helpful. I just wanted to share 2 more things with members of the Alliance before we close. The first is to say that I was very pleased to be able to represent us as an Alliance at a meeting that the Secretary of State, so that's the UK Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, held on digital inclusion, slightly surprisingly, in Ebbw Vale. I don't know why they picked Ebbw Vale to do it, but it was great. We were in a lovely building in Ebbw Vale. And he was joined by Sir Chris Bryant. So Peter Kyle is the MP who is the Secretary of State. And he was joined by Chris Bryant, who is a minister in that department, I think with a particular focus on telecoms. And they are really interested in digital inclusion. And they told us that the Prime Minister was really interested in digital inclusion. And in fact, the Prime Minister has made that department at UK level kind of responsible for the whole of government engaging in digital inclusion. And to be really clear that the motivation for this was around the productivity of the economic productivity of society. So this wasn't about social inclusion, it wasn't about equity, although I'm sure those are important to government. It was very much the view that if they're going to spend a lot of money on technology and innovation in the UK, then they recognize they won't get the benefits of that if people are not digitally included. So actually, although you might think that's not the best reason for caring about digital inclusion, it's a pretty powerful one for government, and therefore they are really putting some effort into it. And they have a series of reports coming out between now and Christmas, I gather, relating to digital in various ways, AI being one of them, but digital inclusion being another. So we'll look out for that. But he came to Wales. He wanted to hear what was going on in Wales. Good Things Foundation were there. They brought people from across from Northern Ireland, and actually from as far away as Norfolk, who'd come all the way to Ebbw Vale for this meeting. And it was a really good discussion, and they brought with them the Director General for the department and several senior directors. So it was there were five or six of them in the room. They heard what everybody said and went away, and hopefully that will inform their thinking. But it was great that we were invited there to express our views. And then the final thing was just to say that, as you will probably know, the current Digital Communities Wales programme is due to end next summer. It had a time limit on it, and we're still waiting to hear what's going to happen from next summer. There is still some uncertainty about that. The Digital Inclusion Alliance for Wales was part of the proposal to Welsh Government that Compass submitted for the DCW tender. And so we are talking to government about kind of the future of the alliance and how it might work. and there is this, I think tension isn't the right word, but there is this slight balance to strike. We've always wanted to be slightly independent of government, so that we can say things to government more easily, as we did with our 5 priorities. But equally, currently, Sarah and Caddy, who's very kindly standing in for her, but Sarah is funded through the DTW programme and therefore effectively is funded by Welsh Government. And so there is that slight sort of balance, and we're talking to government about that. What we would like to do, and this is just sort of a heads up, is in the new year is just to send all network members a survey, just to get your views on a number of potential options for the ongoing support for the network. So nothing for you to do today, but just a kind of heads up and an understanding of why we're asking that question. And actually Welsh Government have now specifically asked us to sound out members of the network. We would have probably done it anyway, but they've asked us to do that. So we will come forward in the new year with a simple survey that asks you a few questions to get your thoughts. And that will be really helpful. We'll be really grateful if you will complete that and return it, so that we're in a much stronger position to go back to Welsh Government and say, look, there's a very clear view from our network members about these various options. That's just to come. But otherwise, really just to thank Caddy for very ably standing in for Sarah. So thank you very much. We're looking forward to having Sarah back. Sarah's currently in a different time zone. She's still working and supporting us, but in a different time zone, so it was difficult for her to be with us this afternoon. So thank you, Caddy, for that. Thank you, as always, to everybody for your really excellent contributions, to our facilitators in the breakout groups, to Sarah for a really interesting and important subject and some useful information. There's a pile of stuff in the chat, which we will capture and do something with. But other than that, I'd just like to wish you all a very happy festive season when it comes. Nadolig Llawen, and we'll see you in March and look forward to hearing from you. You're always very good at keeping in touch with us, and that's great, and we share that with colleagues. So thank you very much. And Sarah's going to produce a summary for us, and we'll share that with you when it's available. So have a great break over Christmas. I hope everyone has a break, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you very much indeed.